Welcome to another episode of The Cynical Writer. Before we get started, I would just like to remind everyone that if you would like to support this channel, the best way to do that is to purchase my books. And I've left a link in the description section in case you're interested. And my latest book is called The Ecstasy and the Ignominy. It is essentially a literary historical novel. It's kind of a combination between um, A Tale of Two Cities, Anna Karenina, and also a little of Crime and Punishment. So if you would like to help me out, you can buy that or any of the other books that I've written. Which, of course, normally when I advertise my books at the beginning of a Cynical Writer video, what I'm talking about is unrelated to that. But in this case, it is kind of related because the topic is why write when no one cares, or at least seems to care. Um, because I can tell you that, especially when you are a self-published author, you write seemingly with the notion that just no one cares. Um, in that sense, it's difficult actually for me to feel sorry for someone like George R.R. Martin, who talks about how there's so much pressure on him to complete his book and all of that. But at the same time, he at least has a fan base who cares whether or not his book comes out. No one cares whether or not my book ever comes out. I make updates for my own satisfaction, but I am under no illusion that anyone actually cares about my latest book coming out. I don't think anyone is out there looking forward to the disappearance of Richard Blackwood. I don't think anyone's saying, when is he going to come out with the disappearance of Richard Blackwood? No, I don't think anyone's saying that. I don't think anyone said that about the ecstasy and the ignominy either. Um, and um, and there's also, I think, a huge difference between buying a book and actually reading a book. That those are entirely two separate things. Because I do think that it is always great when someone purchases an author's work because it helps them from a material standpoint. And it does show a sign of respect if someone likes an author enough or is interested in an author's work enough to buy their book. So that does have merit. I'm not saying that it doesn't. But to me, it's like if someone buys a book but they don't actually read the book, then it's not. I don't get a lot of I don't get a lot of personal satisfaction out of that as an author. Um, from a material standpoint, it's always great to receive a sale. But for example, if I had to choose between, let's say, having, let's say, 5 million um, people buy my book, and or having five readers who are very loyal in the sense that they do in-depth analysis of my book, that they do videos about my books and write essays and reviews about my books. If I had to choose between those two things, it would be very difficult actually for me to choose, believe it or not. If those 5 million readers bought my book but never bothered to read them, um, it would actually be difficult for me to choose because on one hand, the 5 million readers would make me more comfortable from a material standpoint. I'd be able to buy my own house and and be more comfortable and be able to again live in a more comfortable way, perhaps be able to travel more and all of that. So from a material standpoint, the 5 million readers would help me more. But from a personal satisfaction standpoint, I would honestly prefer the five loyal readers. Um, I think I would feel far more personally satisfied with that, even though from a material standpoint, I would be worse off. Um, and at the same time, so re, re, sales are not the be all end all if no one actually reacts to your work, because I do think that writing is communication. And so if I write a book, if I work, let's say, very hard 2 or 3 years to write a book, and then no one seems to give a damn, that can be very disheartening because the whole point is that I want to know what you think. I don't just want you to buy the book. I want to know what you think of the book. I want you to actually, on a deep level, in that sense, I do think that that when someone, let's say, that does an analysis of a book and they are critical of it, if they have actually done, an in-depth analysis, but they're critical of certain things, I actually would value that more than someone who just likes a book and says, "Yay, I liked it," because that doesn't tell me very much. Now, obviously, the ideal, what an author really wants is for someone to do an in-depth analysis of their book and like it. Um, that's the best of both worlds. But even an analysis that is critical can be beneficial, if it seems like the person actually took their time to try to understand. And I'm not talking about a long tirade, a vitriolic tirade, where they're trying to tear you down. I'm talking about someone who wrestles with the text, in a nuanced way. Um, but again, as an author, I don't really receive a lot of that. It does seem like quite often that just no one cares that I put in all this effort, all this work, but no one really seems to care. Mainly because social media is such a shallow place where people are far more concerned about reading in order to, if they read at all. Many people just don't read at all anymore, let alone literature that is actually complex or that will actually challenge them. Um, that is quite rare. And in fact, I actually don't know of anyone who is like me, let's say, who writes the similar kind of books that I write, who is successful as an author. I don't know. I don't. I guess on the bright side, there's no one I can be jealous of, but there's no one who I know who writes the same similar kind of literature to me, who is alive writing right now, especially if they're younger, who writes like me. Maybe there are a few obscure literary authors like Thomas Pynchon who are kind of similar to me, but he's been around a long time and he's nearly 90. Um, but Thomas Pynchon does more experimental kind of literature. My style is more classical. But and Thomas Pynchon's lucky; he doesn't even have to show his face that he can get sales. But that's because he's been around a really long time. But I especially don't know of anyone who is around my age or even in their, let's say, 40s or 50s who who has the kind of success that I would like to have. I don't know of anyone who writes, of especially younger writers who write books similar to me, who have any kind of success. So why should I expect to have success when they don't? I think this is largely a product of an anti-intellectual culture that doesn't really seem to care about literature or wrestling with these kinds of ideas. And I think that's very sad, because I can't control what the culture is like. I can't control what people want to read or anything like that. And so it can be very disheartening when you put in all this work, all this effort, and just no one seems to give a damn. Or when people care far more about the personality or charisma of an author, than the work they actually put in. Um, it seems to me that, and I've said this in other videos, that people, especially people on social media, care far more about your personality than your actual talent as an author. And so, but it does seem like just no one seems to really care because of this anti-intellectual culture that we live in. So, given that, why write if I'm not actually able to communicate with my audience? Because it does seem, quite pointless at times, um, because no one seems to care. In fact, even when it comes to people that I know, even when it comes to people like a lot of writers, they think, well, surely the people that I know, surely they're going to care. That's not necessarily true. If you, for example, because your family is not your target audience. Like I know, for example, I'm always conflicted when it comes to whether or not my family um, should read my work. Because on one hand, I'm like, if they read it and they're critical, I have no place to hide because they can just say it to my face. But at the same time, I also want to know what they think. But most of the time, if I give, let's say, a book to a family member, they either will just put it on the shelf and won't read it, or they'll give up after the first chapter. That's what happens most of the time. Which again, you have to expect that because they're not members of your target audience. But I found that even in some cases, when people are members, or at least seem to be, They might not actually be, but at least seem to be members of my target audience. Even then, they cannot seem to care if, because we live in a culture, for example, where people are very risk averse, and so even if you're the kind of author that someone else might like, if they've never heard of you, or if you don't have a reputation to back you up, they can still be reluctant to read you. And so there's a lack of intellectual curiosity even among people who I think be who would appreciate my work if they were to give it a chance. But because there's this lack of intellectual curiosity in society, because anti-intellectualism can affect people even who are intellectual, because they live in that kind of society. If you live in a kind of society that is about status, that is about easy rewards, that is about instant gratification, even people who value intellectualism can still be affected by that, where they will still be reluctant to try out an author if they don't have a certain amount of status lifting them up. I think this can especially be true of people who read classic literature. Um, there are people who, because, and I've been like this a little bit, although I try not to be, but people who read classic literature tend to be people, and you would think that people who read classic literature are intellectual, which they are more intellectual than the average person. But quite often, people who read classic literature, they can fall into the trap of only appreciating something because it has a certain amount of critical clout, that, oh, well, this has survived the literary canon, therefore it must be good. And if a work doesn't have that, then they're just not going to bother with it. So there can be a kind of what I would call snobbery among intellectuals that can actually prevent them from reading books that would challenge them intellectually. So it's kind of, there can be this closed-minded snobbery even among people who like classic literature, where they can be afraid to read things that they're not familiar with, even if those things in some cases are more intellectual than the things that they're currently reading. And so there can be a closed-mindedness even among intellectuals, and I've often discovered that interacting with some. And so yes, it just seems like no one seems to care. So why write? Why put all this effort in when when I spend years working on something, when just I it's just deaf ears. And I've when it comes to social media, I've produced 1,500 videos on YouTube. I think maybe 3,000 or something on TikTok. And regardless of how many I post, I just do not get anywhere. So in many cases, I just don't see the point, because all of my efforts are for nothing. And I try very, very, really hard, but it's just, and it does seem to me sometimes that content creators who don't try as hard as I do, they get rewarded, um, and I don't, because of luck and other factors. It just, we live in an unjust, unfair world where sometimes the most talented people, the people who have the most merit, aren't rewarded, and mediocrity is often rewarded. And so, why write when I live in an unjust world like that? Well, the only reason I can really think of is because I get personal satisfaction out of writing, is that I love creating beauty for its own sake. Yes, I want other people to appreciate it, but to me, when I create a beautiful sentence, I'm the first audience member. I'm the first person to see that and hear that. And when I feel that sense of awe, when I feel that sense of beauty, to me, it's worth all the effort, because I love that sense of elation. I love that sense of creating something. I suppose it's because I'm because we were created, by God, and we are made in the image of God. I think it's only natural for us to feel a personal satisfaction when it comes to the things that we create, just as God feels that personal satisfaction. And and it seems to me, so I love creating beauty and poetry for its own sake. Um, despite all, when I struggle to work on a sentence or whatever, it can be grueling. It can be hard work. Sometimes it can take me days, weeks, or sometimes I'll come back months later to get it right. But when I finally do get it right, it's worth all of that effort, all of that turmoil, when I finally sense and feel that sense of beauty, it is all worth it. And so to me, that's why I write, because creating beauty has value in itself. I create beauty for its own sake, because through that, that's how I feel alive. That is what gives me ultimately a sense of purpose. And so to me, it's worth it for that reason. And I also find that by writing that I discover so much more about myself, about humanity, because I don't have what you would call an intense personal life or anything like that. And so, very quite often, I learn about humanity through the characters in my head, through them interacting. Um, Sometimes when a character says something that I don't expect them to say, that's when I know that the character is truly detailed, that they have truly come to life, that they are more than just words on a page. They have become a living, breathing thing. And and I just love the sense of escape creating stories gives me from everyday life. I'm transported to another world, so to speak. And I also just receive a sense of purpose um, by writing each day. If I didn't write, I would just be sitting around doing nothing, moping, perhaps reading a little, but then I'd be frustrated by the fact that that author is writing, was writing at the time, and I'm not writing at the time. So writing also just gives me a sense of purpose as well. And so it's that personal satisfaction and and also creating beauty for its own sake. And and it's that drive to create and tell stories that is ultimately what motivates me to keep going. Um, Again, because I just love, for example, the beauty of language, the beauty of words. It, they make me feel alive, so to speak. That when I feel that sense of euphoria, there's nothing that equals it. It is pure bliss when I write a poetic sentence. Um, it is pure euphoria that nothing else compares to it, and that's one of the major reasons why I write. It speaks to my soul, so to speak. It draws out the music in my soul and makes me feel almost divine, metaphorically speaking, in a way. So that's why I write, even though I live in a world that doesn't really seem to value or cherish writing in any way, or books. And now I wish that more people would appreciate books and appreciate writing, but right now we live in a world where they simply don't. And so I hope you enjoyed this video. Again, my books are linked in the description section if you would like to support this channel. And until next time, goodbye.